Eridus hung like a forgotten ember on the edge of the galaxy, its jagged landscapes illuminated by a dim orange star. The settlers called it home out of necessity, not affection. It was a place where Earth sent those it wanted to forget, genetically enhanced soldiers deemed too dangerous, political dissidents who refused to conform, and those whose crimes made them unfit for civilization. Yet, against all odds, they thrived. In the capital settlement of Ironhold, the day began as usual. Solar shields buzzed to life, filtering the harsh radiation of the star, and the air recyclers hummed a steady rhythm. Celine Vos sat in the control center, surrounded by monitors and relics of technology Earth had outlawed. She was Eridus's best technologist, a genius who had turned scraps into life-sustaining machines. Her fingers flew over the console as she monitored a routine diagnostic. Then it happened. A sharp, rhythmic ping echoed through the comm systems. Celine froze, her mind racing. It was no ordinary signal. Its frequency was too precise, its pattern too deliberate. The console translated fragments of alien language, each one more chilling than the last. It wasn't just a signal. It was a warning. Celine activated the colony-wide alert system. Within minutes, Ironhold's leaders gathered in the central hall, their expressions grim. At the head of the table sat Elias Drake, a man with a presence that could silence even the rowdiest crowd. His sharp eyes scanned the room as Celine entered, clutching a datapad. Elias leaned forward as Celine projected the decoded message onto the screen. The room fell silent as the words scrolled before them. Humanity faces judgment. The Galactic Assembly convenes to decide its fate. Prepare for erasure. Murmurs broke the silence, rising into a cacophony of panic and anger. Elias stood, his voice cutting through the noise. We need clarity, not chaos. Celine, where did this come from? Celine explained the signal's origin, tracing it to a relay station beyond Eridus's sector. The station wasn't human, its design was distinctly alien. This wasn't a prank or a mistake. The Assembly, the ruling body of the galaxy, was targeting humanity, and Eridus wasn't just in the crossfire, it was the focal point. Why now? Elias asked, his voice steady but edged with urgency. Celine shook her head. I don't know, but this message didn't reach us by chance. Someone wanted us to see it. A tense silence gripped the room as the implications sank in. They had always lived under the shadow of exile, but this was different. If the Assembly deemed humanity unfit, it wouldn't stop with Earth. It would finish the job, wiping out every last trace of them, including the exiles on Eridus. Elias clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. If humanity's survival depended on the exiles, then they would rise, not for Earth, which had abandoned them, but for themselves. Gather the council, Elias ordered. If they want us erased, we'll show them what outcasts can do. The transmission from Earth arrived just as the colony council on Eridus convened. It was a rare occurrence. Earth had ignored Eridus for decades, pretending it didn't exist except when convenient. Now, they were reaching out, their words polished and their tone laced with urgency. On a flickering holoscreen in the center of the council chamber, Earth's ambassador, a silver-haired man with a practiced smile, appeared. Behind him, the pristine backdrop of Earth's capital contrasted starkly with the rugged walls of Ironhold. He began with words meant to soothe. Humanity faces an existential threat, he said. The Galactic Assembly has turned its gaze on us, and they judge us unworthy. But we know that humanity is more than its mistakes. We know we are better when united. The council members exchanged skeptical glances. Elias Drake leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. The ambassador's rhetoric was nothing new. It was the same patronizing tone Earth had used when it exiled them here in the first place. The ambassador continued, his smile unwavering. We cannot undo the past, but we can correct it. Eridas is a part of humanity. We need your cooperation to demonstrate that we are united as a species." Celine Vos snorted quietly from her seat. She had seen enough manipulative speeches to recognize the emptiness behind the words. Earth didn't care about unity or redemption, it cared about survival. Elias finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "What exactly are you asking of us?" The ambassador's smile faltered for the briefest moment before he recovered. "We need the technology you've developed on Eridas. The Assembly views you as a black mark on humanity's record, but if we show them that even the outcasts of our society can contribute something valuable, they might reconsider." Celine stood, unable to stay silent. "So now we're valuable. When you exiled us here, we were criminals, experiments gone wrong, people you wanted to erase. Now you want us to clean up your mess." The ambassador's composure cracked, his voice rising. "This is bigger than your grievances. The fate of our species is at stake." Celine laughed coldly. "Grievances? You exiled my family for crimes they didn't commit. You sent children here because they didn't fit your genetic ideal. Spare us the lecture." Elias raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough." He fixed his gaze on the ambassador, his tone cutting. "If you need us, it's on our terms. No patronizing speeches, no half-truths. Tell us the full extent of what you know about the Assembly's plans." The ambassador hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "They've given us an ultimatum," he admitted. "Demonstrate progress by integrating Eridas within the year or face extermination." The room erupted in murmurs, but Elias remained still, calculating. "So they expect us to save humanity to avoid our own destruction. Convenient," he said. The ambassador's voice grew softer. "Please, we need your help." Elias stood, his towering presence silencing the chamber. "We'll help, but not for Earth. If we're going to stand against the Assembly, we'll do it for us. And when we succeed, you will acknowledge Eridas as equals, not as outcasts." The ambassador nodded, but everyone in the room knew the fight was just beginning. Eridas would have to save the species that had discarded them. The information provided by Earth painted a grim picture. The Galactic Assembly's ultimatum was no idle threat. They had already initiated a covert operation to assess humanity's compliance. Surveillance drones had been deployed to monitor human activity on both Earth and its colonies. The exiles on Eridas were the focus, viewed as the ultimate test of whether humanity could reform or if it deserved obliteration. In Ironhold's war room, Elias Drake studied a holographic projection of the Assembly's operational routes. Celine Vos had worked through the night to decrypt the data Earth provided, her irritation barely masked as she explained the findings to the Council. "The Assembly isn't waiting to see if we'll cooperate," she said. "They're probing our defenses, looking for vulnerabilities. If they decide we aren't worth the effort, they'll move to eliminate us without warning." Elias nodded, his expression grim. He had suspected as much. The Assembly's actions weren't those of a governing body seeking peaceful resolution. They were laying the groundwork for war. Celine expanded the projection, highlighting a relay station orbiting a dead star near Eridas. "This is their observation post," she said. "It's disguised as a derelict mining facility, but its transmissions match the signal we intercepted. They're watching us from there." The Council erupted in debate. Some argued for a preemptive strike, while others feared retaliation would hasten the Assembly's judgment. Elias listened in silence, his mind already racing ahead. "Enough," he said finally, his voice cutting through the noise. "We need to know more before we act. A direct assault would confirm their worst fears about humanity, but if we can infiltrate the station and retrieve their intel, we might gain the leverage we need to turn the tide." Celine crossed her arms. "And who's volunteering for this suicide mission?" Elias's gaze was steady. "I'll lead it myself." A tense silence followed. Celine opened her mouth to argue, but stopped when she saw the determination in his eyes. He wasn't asking for permission. Later that night, Elias assembled a small team of exiles, specialists in stealth, hacking, and combat. Each one had been cast out from Earth for being too dangerous, too independent, or too different. Now, those same traits made them Eurydice's best hope. The journey to the relay station was fraught with danger. The team navigated asteroid fields and evaded automated patrols before docking with the facility under the cover of its blind spot. Inside, the station was cold and silent, its corridors illuminated by faint, pulsating lights. As they advanced, Celine's voice crackled through their comms, guiding them remotely. "You're approaching the core," she said. "I'm picking up a lot of encrypted files here." Elias gestured for his team to move cautiously. The air felt heavier with every step. When they reached the central hub, they found something unexpected: a cluster of pods containing alien drones, dormant but poised for activation. "This isn't just surveillance," Elias said grimly. "It's a forward base. They're preparing for a strike." Before the team could react, the station's alarms blared, and the drones began to stir. Their infiltration had triggered a failsafe. Elias gripped his weapon and issued a single order: "Hold the line." The battle for survival had begun. The return to Eurydice was met with subdued relief. Elias and his team had survived the relay station, but the cost weighed heavily on them. 2 of their own were lost in the chaos, and the data they extracted painted a dire picture. The assembly wasn't just monitoring, they were escalating. Plans for surgical strikes on Eurydice and Earth were underway, targeting critical infrastructure to cripple humanity before a final purge. In the council chamber, Elias stood before a tense gathering. The holographic display of the extracted files flickered above them, revealing troop movements and strategic objectives. "The assembly is already preparing to strike," Elias said. "We have weeks, maybe less, before they act." The room erupted in heated debate. Some argued for immediate retaliation, while others called for reinforcing Eurydice's defenses. Amid the chaos, Celine Voss, sitting at the edge of the table, reviewed the data with furrowed brows. Something about the timelines didn't add up. "Earth is barely mentioned in these plans," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Most of the assembly's resources are aimed at us. Why would they focus their efforts here instead of hitting Earth first?" The room fell silent as her words sank in. A grim possibility began to take shape. Elias met Celine's gaze, understanding her unspoken conclusion. Someone on Earth had likely sold them out, diverting the assembly's wrath toward Eurydice in exchange for leniency. As suspicion mounted, Celine uncovered a flagged communication embedded in the files. It was encrypted with Earth's diplomatic signature, its contents heavily redacted. Someone from the delegation on Eurydice had been in contact with the assembly. "This is proof," Celine said, her voice laced with anger. "Someone in Earth's delegation is working against us." Tension in the room exploded. The Earth representatives present protested vehemently, accusing the exiles of paranoia. One delegate, a former diplomat named Marek Trask, slammed his fist on the table, demanding evidence. Elias remained calm but unyielding. "You'll get your evidence," he said, "but until we have answers, no one leaves this colony." The colony's security forces, veterans of exile themselves, quietly took up positions around the chamber. The Earth delegation's protests turned to quiet fury, but they complied. Celine, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to decrypt the flagged communication. Her frustration mounted as layers of encryption resisted her efforts, each more sophisticated than the last. Finally, after hours of effort, the message unraveled. The message was a directive from a high-ranking Earth official, instructing the assembly to concentrate their forces on Eurydice, framing the exiles as the primary threat to galactic stability. In exchange, Earth would be spared immediate retaliation, given time to integrate assembly reforms. Celine's hands trembled as she read the full text aloud to the council. The room erupted into chaos once more, with the Earth delegation denying involvement. Marek Trask stood silent, his face pale, before finally speaking. "This wasn't my doing," he said, his voice low, "but I know who sent it." Before anyone could press him further, an explosion rocked the council chamber. Dust and debris filled the air as the room descended into confusion. Outside, sirens blared. Eridus's defenses had been sabotaged, leaving the colony exposed. Elias pushed through the chaos, shouting orders. Celine's eyes narrowed as realization dawned. The betrayal was deeper than they'd feared, and now their survival hung by a thread. The colony burned as the first wave of the Assembly's strike force descended. Their ships hovered in the atmosphere like gleaming predators, sending down precision bombardments that turned whole districts to rubble. The sabotage of Eridus's defenses had left them exposed, and the exiles scrambled to mount any form of resistance. In the heart of the chaos, Elias Drake led a desperate counterattack. The exiles had no formal army, only scattered squads of augmented soldiers, rogue engineers, and civilians willing to fight for their lives. Armed with experimental weapons and makeshift shields, they stood against an enemy far more advanced. Elias barked orders into his comm as explosions lit up the horizon. "Redirect power to the eastern perimeter. We need those auto turrets back online." Celine Voss worked furiously in Ironhold's central hub, her fingers flying across the controls. The sabotage had left their systems in disarray, and she was racing to reroute power to the colony's remaining defenses. "We're losing ground too fast," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "If I can activate the cloaking array, we can buy some time, but the power surge might fry half the colony's systems." "Do it," Elias replied without hesitation. "If we don't survive today, nothing else matters." Celine keyed in the final sequence. Across Eridus, the air shimmered as the cloaking device activated, enveloping the colony in a veil of light-bending energy. The Assembly's ships hesitated, their targeting systems disrupted, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they unleashed swarms of drones programmed to search and destroy. Elias's team regrouped near the western barricade, where the fighting was fiercest. A towering alien walker loomed above them, its cannons tearing through their defenses. With a grim resolve, Elias commandeered a prototype railgun, one of Eridus's forbidden weapons. "This is what they fear," he muttered, aiming at the walker's core. With a deafening roar, the railgun fired, its projectile punching through the walker's armor and detonating its energy core. The explosion rocked the battlefield, sending the remaining drones into disarray. For a moment, there was silence. Then Celine's voice crackled through the comm. "We've intercepted their command frequency. They're pulling back." Cheers erupted among the exiles, but Elias remained stoic. He knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The Assembly wasn't retreating in defeat. They were regrouping for a final assault. In the aftermath, the council reconvened amidst the wreckage. Casualties were high, and Ironhold lay in ruins. Elias stood before the weary survivors, his voice steady despite the weight of their losses. "We've proven we can fight, but this isn't a victory," he said. "The Assembly will return, and next time, they won't hold back." Celine approached, holding a damaged datapad she'd salvaged from the sabotage site. Her expression was grim. "I traced the sabotage to a relay station inside the colony. Whoever betrayed us is still here." Elias's jaw tightened. "Find them. We can't fight a war on two fronts." As the exiles began rebuilding, tensions simmered. The price of survival had been steep, and the betrayal within their ranks threatened to cost them even more. Time was running out, and the Outcasts knew their next move could mean the difference between extinction and defiance. The Traitor's Trail led deep into Eridus's underground labyrinth, a network of tunnels and chambers that had been carved from the planet's bedrock. Originally meant as shelters for the exiles, the tunnels now served as hiding places for those who sought to undermine them. Celine Voss and a small security team moved cautiously through the dimly lit passageways, guided by the traces left in the system logs. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the silence became. Celine's tablet blinked with signals narrowing in on their target. Finally, they found a makeshift control room tucked within an abandoned mining shaft. It was empty but still active. Celine scanned the systems and froze. A direct uplink to the assembly was running, transmitting tactical data about Eridus's defenses. Her heart sank as she recognized the encryption signature, Earth's. She called Elias immediately. "We've got confirmation. The traitor isn't just working for Earth. They've been actively feeding the assembly everything about us." Elias's voice was cold, barely restrained fury. "Secure the site. I'm on my way." Minutes later, Elias arrived with Marek Trask, the former Earth diplomat who had claimed to know who sent the earlier communication. Trask looked pale as he studied the uplink's logs. This wasn't supposed to happen," he said. "I thought the assembly would just pressure Eridus. I didn't know they'd go this far." Elias's piercing gaze pinned him in place. "You knew enough to stay silent until it was too late." Before Trask could answer, an alert blared through Celine's tablet. The uplink was sending a final burst of data, coordinates for Ironhold's hidden power reserves. With those, the assembly could cripple the colony's remaining systems in one strike. "We can't stop the transmission," Celine said, her voice rising in panic. "Then cut the power to this entire grid," Elias ordered. Celine hesitated. Cutting the grid would plunge half the colony into darkness, leaving critical areas vulnerable. But there was no time to argue. She initiated the shutdown, and the uplink flickered and died. The lights dimmed, and the tension in the room seemed to grow heavier. Trask stepped back, hands raised. "I never wanted this," he said. "I was just trying to negotiate Earth's survival." Elias advanced on him, his voice sharp. "You didn't just gamble with Earth's survival. You sold us out to buy time for the same people who abandoned us." Trask's shoulders slumped. "They promised the assembly would spare Earth if they handed Eridus over. I thought." Elias cut him off. "You thought wrong." Before anyone could react, another explosion shook the tunnels. Celine checked her tablet and paled. "They've found us. The assembly's forces are targeting the underground network." Elias took charge immediately. "Fall back to the central hub. We'll make our stand there." As they retreated, Elias's mind raced. The betrayal had nearly cost them everything, but it had also revealed the assembly's intentions more clearly. They didn't just want to eradicate Eridus, they wanted to send a message to all of humanity. Elias turned to Celine as they reached the surface. "Prepare the prototype weapons. If they want a message, we'll send one of our own." This was no longer just about survival. The Outcasts would show the galaxy what humanity was capable of when backed into a corner. Elias Drake stood on the smoldering plains outside Ironhold, watching the assembly's fleet descend through the choking sky. The ground shook with each passing second as alien war machines deployed in disciplined waves. Their assault was relentless, but the exiles of Eridus had prepared for this moment. The Outcasts had nothing left to lose, and that made them dangerous. Celine Voss worked feverishly at the tactical console inside the command bunker. With each keystroke, she coordinated Eridus's defenses, deploying their last line of experimental weapons. The colony's orbital rail cannons, built in secret from scavenged alien tech, hummed to life. "The assembly will never expect this," she said into her calm. Elias's voice came back steady. "They'll learn soon enough." The cannons roared to life, launching kinetic projectiles into the assembly's fleet. Ships exploded in fiery bursts, their wreckage raining down on the battlefield. The exiles cheered, but Elias raised his hand, signaling for silence. This was just the opening gambit. The assembly countered swiftly, deploying a shield matrix around their remaining ships. Ground forces surged forward, alien drones and walkers advancing in perfect formation. They moved with surgical precision, but they underestimated the ingenuity born from desperation. Celine activated the colony's EMP mines, hidden beneath the barren terrain. Pulses of energy erupted, shorting out the drones and sending walkers crashing to the ground. Elias and his squad surged forward, taking advantage of the confusion. Their improvised weapons, railguns, plasma grenades, and kinetic blades, were devastating in the hands of exiled soldiers who had trained for years in the harshest conditions. Amid the chaos, Celine intercepted an unencrypted transmission. The Assembly's flagship, a behemoth orbiting above, was coordinating the entire assault. Without it, the enemy forces would crumble. She patched the intel through to Elias. "We take out that flagship, and this is over." Elias didn't hesitate. He called for the prototype stealth ship Prejudice had secretly constructed. Armed with a fusion lance and cloaked in experimental shielding, it was their last hope of reaching the flagship undetected. As the ship launched, Celine stayed behind to direct the battle. She watched as Elias and a hand-picked team breached the Assembly's command vessel. Her connection to their comms flickered with static, but the sound of gunfire and Elias's steady voice reassured her. Inside the flagship, Elias fought his way to the command center. The Assembly's leaders, a council of alien beings, stood before him, their holographic forms flickering with disbelief. "This ends here," Elias said, leveling the fusion lance at the central core. The council pleaded for negotiation, but Elias saw through their desperation. They had never intended to spare humanity, they had sought only to delay their annihilation. Elias fired, the core exploded in a blinding flash, and the flagship erupted in flames. As it fell, the Assembly's forces on the ground faltered, their coordination shattered. Celine watched from the bunker as the fleet retreated. The exiles had done the impossible. Against all odds, they had broken the Assembly's grip on humanity. The Outcasts stood battered but unbowed, their defiance echoing across the stars. For the first time, they weren't just survivors. They were victors. The battle had ended, but the true fight was just beginning. As the Assembly's ships retreated into the black void, Prejudice stood victorious, its people battered but resolute. The dust settled over the war-torn plains, and the surviving exiles gathered in Ironhold's central square, their faces grim but full of defiance. Elias Drake stood atop a makeshift podium, looking out at the assembled crowd. Behind him, the holographic displays flickered with the aftermath of their battle. The fall of the Assembly flagship, the retreat of their invading forces, and the shattered remnants of the alien fleets. The exiles had not only survived, they had crushed the invaders with a force no one had believed them capable of. But Elias knew their fight wasn't over. The Assembly had been forced to retreat, but they would regroup. The galaxy had seen humanity's strength, but it had also seen its flaws, its fractured past, its betrayal. The exiles had won the battle, but they would need more than weapons to win the war. They would need unity. He stepped forward, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "This victory isn't just ours," Elias said. "It's for every man, woman, and child abandoned by Earth. For every colony that was forgotten. For every person who was cast aside because they didn't fit some ideal. Today, we show the galaxy that humanity is stronger than its divisions. Today, we show the galaxy what it means to stand together." The crowd cheered, but the applause was muted by the weight of the moment. There was still so much to rebuild, so many wounds to heal. Celine Vos stood by Elias's side, her expression thoughtful. "We've done the impossible, but we've also earned something else," she said quietly. "We've earned the chance to shape our own future." Elias nodded, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. This was only the beginning. The victory against the Assembly was the spark that could ignite a fire of change, but it was a fire that had to be carefully tended, or it could consume everything they'd fought for. Back on Earth, the government was reeling. News of the Assembly's failure to wipe out humanity spread like wildfire across the galactic network. Earth's leaders scrambled to contain the fallout, torn between those who wanted to acknowledge the exiles' victory and those who still believed they could control the narrative. but the exiles of Eridus had sent a message too clear to ignore. The galaxy now knew that humanity wasn't a fractured species. It was one that could rise, even from the depths of its mistakes. In the following days, Earth's diplomatic channels opened once more, but this time, it was the exiles of Eridus who held the upper hand. The negotiations were harsh, the terms uncompromising. No longer would Earth hold sway over those it had once cast aside. The Outcasts were humanity's future now, and the rest of the galaxy would have to reckon with their strength. As Elias Drake watched the first of the new diplomatic ships arrive in Eridus's orbit, he turned to Celine. "We've done it," he said. "We've shown them what humanity can be. Now we rebuild, not just our world, but our future." And this time, it would be on their own terms. The Outcasts had made the first step toward humanity's true rally, a future where no one would be left behind.